Please save Mama. 3 men keep coming after us. Then a Hell's Angel became their only hope. The rain came down hard. It hit the road in sheets, bouncing off the blacktop like tiny silver stones. Thunder rolled across the sky somewhere far off, low and heavy, shaking the air. The kind of night that made most people want to stay indoors, curl up somewhere warm, and wait for morning. Jack Turner was not most people. He guided his motorcycle off the highway and into the gravel lot of a small roadside diner. The sign above the door blinked in the wet dark. Half the letters had given up working years ago, but enough still glowed to show the word, open. That was all Jack needed to see. He killed the engine. For a moment he just sat there, rain drumming against his shoulders, running in rivers down the back of his worn leather vest. The vest was old and heavy, covered in patches that told a story most people did not want to hear. The Hell's Angels patch on the back was faded at the edges, but still clear enough. Still enough to make people step back. Jack did not mind that anymore. He pulled off his helmet and hooked it over the handlebar. His dark hair was streaked with gray at the temples. Deep lines ran across his face, the kind that came from years of wind and sun and things a person could not forget, no matter how far they rode. He was a big man, wide across the shoulders, with hands that looked like they had done hard work most of his life. Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today. Now back to the story. He climbed off the bike and pushed through the diner door. The little bell above it rang. The warm smell of coffee and fried food wrapped around him the second he stepped inside. A few heads turned. A man near the window pulled his jacket a little tighter. A couple sitting by the counter leaned toward each other and said something quiet. A little kid stared from a booth until his mother reached over and gently turned his face away. Jack had seen it all before. He walked to the far end of the counter and sat down on a stool. He folded his hands on the laminate surface and looked straight ahead at the menu board on the wall, even though he already knew what he wanted. Well, look what the storm dragged in. He looked up. A woman in her 50s stood behind the counter, smiling at him with the kind of smile that meant it. She had gray streaks in her dark hair, a coffee pot in one hand, and an apron that had seen 1,000 long shifts. Her name tag said, Carol. Hey, Carol, Jack said. She was already flipping over his cup and filling it. Black, no sugar, same as always. Same as always, he agreed. Carol had worked this diner for as long as Jack had been stopping here. She was one of the few people on this stretch of road who did not treat him like a threat to be watched. She knew what he left behind every time he visited. Not just a good tip, though he always left one. Sometimes she found folded bills tucked under coffee cups at tables where young mothers sat alone with hungry kids. Once she had walked outside to find him kneeling beside a broken-down minivan, fixing a flat tire for a family of 4 in the middle of a summer storm. He never asked for anything in return. He just helped and then rode on. Carol set a plate of pie down in front of him, without him asking. Apple? She said. Made this morning. Jack looked at it, then at her. I didn't order this. No, she said simply, and walked away to refill someone else's coffee. Jack sat quietly with his pie and his coffee. Around him the diner hummed with small sounds, forks on plates, low conversation, the rain tapping against the windows, a country song drifting from a speaker somewhere in the back. He wrapped both hands around his mug and stared at the steam rising off the surface. He was tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixed. The kind that settled deep in a person's chest after too many years of being alone. He had been riding a long time, long enough that most faces blurred together, long enough that he had stopped expecting anyone to see past the vest and the patches and the rough edges. He took a slow sip of coffee. The bell above the door rang. Jack did not look up right away. People came and went all the time. It was a diner. That was what happened. But then he heard it. Not the sound of someone walking in from the rain, not the rustle of a wet coat or the stomp of boots on the mat. What he heard was something sharper than that. A breath, short and broken, like someone who had been running too long and was only now letting themselves stop. He looked up. A young woman stood just inside the door. Her dark hair was soaked flat against her face. Her jacket was damp and her eyes were wide and moving fast, jumping to every corner of the room like she was checking every shadow at once. She was holding the hand of a small boy beside her. The boy could not have been more than 7 years old. He was pale and soaked through, his sneakers squeaking on the tile floor, his small chest rising and falling too quickly. The woman pulled the boy close against her side. Every person in the diner had gone quiet. Then the boy turned his head. His eyes moved across the room slowly, past the couple at the window, past the family in the corner booth, past the man by the register. He was looking for something, or someone. His eyes found Jack. Jack did not move. The boy pulled free from his mother's grip. His sneakers squeaked across the tile floor as he crossed the diner in small, quick steps. He stopped right in front of Jack's stool and looked up at him with eyes that were too serious for a 7-year-old, too full of things no child should have to carry. His chin was trembling just slightly. He leaned forward and said it in a voice barely above a whisper. "Please save my mama." He swallowed hard. "3 men keep coming after us." The diner stayed quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, the heavy kind, the kind where everyone holds their breath at the same time without meaning to. Jack looked down at the boy standing in front of him. Those small eyes were locked onto his face, searching, waiting. Jack had seen fear before. He had seen it in grown men twice his size, but watching it sit in the face of a 7-year-old boy hit differently. It sat heavier. He set his coffee mug down slowly. Then he did something that seemed to surprise everyone in the room, including the boy himself. He got off his stool and knelt down. One knee on the cold tile floor, bringing himself down to the boy's level. He was still a big man, even kneeling. But he kept his voice soft. "What's your name, son?" The boy blinked. His chin was still trembling. "Noah." "Noah." Jack nodded like that mattered, because it did. "My name's Jack." He held the boy's gaze steady. "No one is taking you anywhere tonight. You hear me?" Noah stared at him for a long moment. Then, very slowly, he gave a small nod. Jack stood back up and looked toward the door, where the woman still stood frozen, her hand pressed flat against her chest, watching. He waved her over gently. She came. Her steps were uncertain at first, then quicker when Noah reached back and grabbed her hand and pulled her forward. "Come sit down," Jack said, nodding towards the end of the counter where there were 2 empty stools beside his. Carol. Carol was already moving. She appeared from behind the counter with a glass of water and a small plate of crackers and set them down without a word. She caught Jack's eye for just a second. He gave her a small nod of thanks. The woman sat down. Noah pressed himself against her side, his small fingers wrapped tight around her arm. Up close, Jack could see the dark circles under her eyes. The way her hands would not quite stop shaking. She had not slept, not properly, not in a while. "What's your name?" Jack asked. "Emily," she said. Her voice was low and cracked slightly at the edges. Emily Carter. Tell me what happened, Emily. She let out a long, shaky breath, like she had been holding it for days. It came out in pieces at first, then all at once. 3 men. She did not know all their names. They had started showing up about a week ago, outside her apartment building in the morning, near her work in the afternoon. One of them had been standing across the street from Noah's school on a Wednesday, just watching. She had called the police, but by the time anyone came, the men were gone. No proof, no names, nothing to show. So she started running. She and Noah had been moving from town to town for 4 days, staying in cheap motels, paying cash when she had it, sleeping in her car when she did not. I didn't know where else to go, she said quietly. I just drove until I couldn't anymore. Jack listened without interrupting. He let her get it all out. When she stopped talking, the diner had stayed respectfully quiet around them, the low hum of the rain filling the spaces between words. Then Jack looked at Noah. The boy had stayed close to his mother the whole time, but his free hand had been pressed against the front of his jacket, holding something flat and firm against his chest. Jack had noticed it the moment Noah walked over. He had not said anything about it yet. "What have you got there, Noah?" Jack asked gently. Noah hesitated. He looked up at his mother. She gave him a small nod. Slowly, Noah reached inside his jacket and pulled out a small notebook. The cover was soft and bent at the corners, the edges worn down from being handled so many times. He held it out to Jack with both hands, the way a child hands over something they have been guarding carefully for a long time. Jack took it gently. He opened the first page. The handwriting was small and uneven, but neat for a child. Every entry had a date at the top. Below each date was a short description, a location, a detail about the men. Monday, black truck outside our house, big man with a gray coat. Tuesday, same man near Mom's work. He looked at her for a long time. Wednesday, 2 of them this time. One stayed by the school fence. Thursday, the truck again. Different street, but I saw it. Jack turned the pages slowly and carefully, reading every word. His jaw was tight. His eyes moved steadily, missing nothing. Noah had been writing this down every day, every single day. In his small, careful handwriting, he had recorded what he saw because he was afraid no one would believe them without proof. This child had been trying to protect his mother the only way he knew how. Jack closed the notebook gently and held it for a moment in both hands. He looked at Emily, then at Noah. "You did good," he said quietly, looking at the boy. "Writing all this down, that took guts." Noah looked down at his sneakers. Jack leaned forward slightly. "Hey, look at me." Noah looked up. "I mean it," Jack said. That was brave. The boy's eyes were glassy, but he held Jack's gaze this time. Jack set the notebook carefully on the counter in front of him and straightened up. He looked at Emily directly. "I don't know yet who these men are or what they want," he said, "but I'm going to find out." His voice was calm and even. No big promises, no dramatic declarations, just a simple, steady truth. "You came to the right place tonight, and you're not going to face this alone anymore." Emily pressed her lips together. Her eyes filled, but she did not look away. For the first time in 4 days, her shoulders came down just slightly from around her ears. Beside her, Noah reached out and quietly picked up one of the crackers Carol had left and took a small bite. Jack picked up his coffee mug. He had some thinking to do. Jack set his mug down and folded his hands on the counter. "Tell me about your husband," he said. Emily blinked, like the question caught her off guard. She had been expecting something different. Another question about the men, maybe, or what she had with her, or where she planned to go next. Not that one. She glanced down at Noah. The boy had finished his cracker and was sitting quietly with his head resting against her arm, his eyes getting heavy. The warmth of the diner and the food in his stomach were doing what exhaustion had been waiting to do for days. Emily pulled him a little closer and looked back at Jack. "His name was Daniel," she said softly. "Daniel Carter." She paused. "He passed 2 years ago." "I'm sorry," Jack said, and he meant it. She gave a small nod. "It was sudden. A heart problem nobody knew about." She looked at her hands. "He was 34. Jack did not rush her. "He was a good man," she continued. "Worked in finance, nothing flashy. He just loved his job and he loved us." She looked at Noah, who was drifting now, his small body slowly going soft against her side. "After he died, things were hard. Money was tight. But we managed. We always managed." Her voice dropped. "And then these men started showing up and I don't understand it, Jack. I don't know what they want. Daniel has been gone for 2 years. We didn't have anything worth taking. We barely had enough to cover rent most months." She shook her head slowly. Her eyes were tired and confused in equal measure. "I keep asking myself what I did," she said. "What I missed. What I should have known." "You didn't do anything," Jack said. "Then why are they coming after us?" Jack had no answer for that yet, but he held her gaze and kept his voice level. "That's what we're going to figure out." He picked up the notebook again and turned a few pages back towards the beginning, reading over some of the earlier entries. Something about the pattern was already pulling at the back of his mind. The way the men had started slow, patient, watching before moving. That was not random behavior. That was calculated. These were not desperate people acting on impulse. They were organized. And organized people had something specific they were looking for. He was still turning that over in his mind when he caught it. A reflection in the long window beside the door. The rain had eased off slightly and the parking lot outside had shifted from a blur of wet light to something more visible. And there, idling at the far edge of the lot near the tree line, was a dark truck. No headlights, just sitting there. Jack did not move fast. He did not stand up or turn around. He just set the notebook down slowly and reached for his coffee mug like nothing had changed. His eyes stayed on the reflection, steady and calm. Carol passed behind the counter, and he caught her attention with a single quiet word. "Carol." She leaned in slightly. "Back door still open?" She looked at him for just a second. Then she gave a small nod and moved on without another word. Jack looked at Emily. She had not noticed the truck. Noah was almost fully asleep against her now. Jack kept his voice low and even, no alarm in it at all. "You said the police came once and there was nothing to show them." "That's right," she said. "That's the problem," Jack said. He tapped one finger lightly on the notebook. "Fear without proof doesn't hold up. But evidence does." He looked at her directly. "These men want you scared. Scared people make mistakes. Scared people run without thinking and leave things behind." He shook his head once. "We are not going to do that." Emily watched him carefully. "We're going to find the truth first," Jack said. "And when we have it, we protect you with that, not with fear." The rain had stopped by morning. Jack sat outside the diner on the wooden bench near the front steps, a fresh cup of coffee warming his hands. The parking lot was quiet. Puddles from the night before caught the pale morning light and held it still. The dark truck was long gone. He had made sure of that. Emily and Noah were still sleeping in the small back room Carol had offered them. Carol had not asked many questions. She just handed over a spare key and a folded blanket and said, "Nobody gets hurt in my diner." Jack had appreciated that more than he let on. He pulled out his phone. It was just past 6 in the morning, but the man he was calling would already be awake. Ray Cortez never slept past 5. Jack had known him for nearly 15 years. Ray had been a runner for a claims investigation firm before he got smart and went independent. He knew how to find people. He knew how to read financial trails the way Jack read roadmaps, and he owed Jack a favor that was long overdue. The phone rang twice. Turner. Ray's voice was rough and dry like gravel on a back road. I need names run, Jack said. Of course you do. A pause, the sound of a chair shifting. What have you got? Jack described the 3 men as best he could from the notebook entries and what little Emily had said the night before. The dark truck. The man near the school. The one who had come to Emily's workplace. Ray asked short, direct questions, and Jack gave him short, direct answers. When they were done, Ray said he would call back within the hour. Jack finished his coffee and watched a sparrow hop along the edge of a puddle. It dipped its beak in once, then again, then flew off into the tree line. 40 minutes later, the phone rang. 3 names, Ray said. You ready? Jack pulled out a pen and the small notepad he kept in his vest pocket. Go. First one is Marcus Vale, age 41, financial consultant. Clean on paper, but he has had 2 civil complaints filed against him in the last 3 years. Both settled out of court, both quietly. He used to run a private investment firm. Ray paused. The firm closed about 18 months ago. Jack wrote the name down. Second is Dean Holloway, age 39. He was Vale's operations manager at the same firm. Short temper, couple of assault charges from years back that got dropped, the kind of man who pushes until someone pushes back. Jack underlined the name. Third is Rick Dalton, age 43. Low profile, background in accounting. Worked with the same group as the other 2. Ray's tone shifted slightly. Here is where it gets interesting, Turner. All 3 of them had a 4th partner. Close business partner. The 4 of them ran the investment firm together. Jack held still. The 4th man passed away about 2 years ago, Ray continued. Heart failure. His name was Daniel Carter. Jack set the pen down slowly. He stared at the name on the notepad. Daniel Carter, Emily's husband. He breathed out through his nose and kept his voice steady. You sure? As sure as the records say, Ray answered. They were not just business partners. They ran in the same social circles for years. Close group, all of them tied to the same investment accounts. Another pause. But here is the thing that is going to complicate your morning. Jack waited. About 6 months before Daniel Carter died, the firm started falling apart. Accounts were being questioned. People were asking where their money went. Ray's voice dropped just slightly. Vale and Holloway have been telling anyone who will listen that Daniel Carter drained the accounts and hid the money before he died. They have been saying he stole from all of them and left them holding the damage. Jack looked down at the notebook in his hand. They claim Emily's husband robbed them, Ray said, and they want back whatever he took. Jack sat with the notepad on his knee for a long moment. Daniel Carter. He said the name quietly to himself, like he was testing the weight of it. The sparrow was gone. The parking lot was still. The morning felt heavier than it had 10 minutes ago. He called Ray back. Tell me more about Daniel Carter, Jack said. Not the firm, him. Who was he before all of this? Ray was quiet for a moment. The sound of fingers moving across a keyboard came through the phone. Give me a minute. Jack waited. A car rolled past on the highway beyond the lot. A semi. The low rumble of it faded slowly into the distance. "All right," Ray said. "Daniel Carter. Grew up in a small town about 40 miles east of where you are now. Went to school for finance. Smart guy by all accounts. Worked for a couple of regional banks before linking up with Vail and Holloway about 8 years ago. No criminal record. No complaints filed against him personally." A pause. "But the rumors are a different story." "What kind of rumors?" "The kind that follow a man after he can no longer speak for himself." Ray's voice was flat. "Vail has been talking to people, former clients, people who lost money in the firm. He has been making sure they all heard one version of the story. That Daniel Carter was the one who moved the accounts. That Daniel was the one who made the money disappear." Jack stared at the tree line. "And nobody questioned that?" "Why would they? Carter was dead. Vail and Holloway were still standing there, looking sad and pointing at a man in the ground." Ray exhaled. "It is an old move. Blame the person who cannot defend themselves." Jack wrote a few words on the notepad. Then he circled Daniel Carter's name. "Were there any people who pushed back on that story?" Jack asked. "A few," Ray said. "But not loud enough to matter. And from what I can find, they were quietly shut down before they could dig too deep." Another pause. "Turner. Whoever this woman is, the people chasing her are not small time. They are scared. And scared men with resources are dangerous." Jack thanked him and ended the call. He sat for another minute, just thinking. Then the diner door opened behind him. Emily stepped out carrying 2 cups of coffee. She had changed into a clean shirt, but her eyes still carried the weight of someone who had not truly rested. She handed him one of the cups without saying anything first, which Jack appreciated. Some people filled silence with noise. Emily was not one of them. She sat down on the bench beside him, leaving a respectful space between them, and wrapped both hands around her cup. "Noah is still sleeping," she said. "Good," Jack said. "He needed it." She nodded, looked out at the parking lot. The puddles were starting to dry at the edges where the morning sun touched them. Jack turned the notepad over in his hands. He did not show it to her yet, but he needed to ask. "Emily?" He kept his voice even. "In the months before Daniel passed, did he seem different to you?" She looked down at her cup. The pause told him everything before she even spoke. "Yes," she said quietly. "He got quiet. Stayed up late a lot. He stopped talking about work the way he used to." She turned the cup slowly in her hands. "I asked him once. He just said he was handling something. That it would be fine." Her voice dropped. "He said he was protecting us." "Did you believe him?" "I wanted to." She looked up at the sky. He was not a man who lied easily. You could always see it on his face when something was wrong. And something was very wrong. Jack nodded slowly. She looked at him then. "What did you find out?" Jack looked down at the notepad, at Daniel Carter's circled name, at the words he had written beside it. Not a thief. Something else entirely. "I am not sure yet," he said carefully, "but I do not think you have the full story about what happened to your husband." The drive to Frank and Linda's place took about 20 minutes. Jack led the way on his motorcycle. Emily followed in her car, keeping close. Noah sat in the back seat with his notebook pressed against his chest, like it was the most important thing in the world. Maybe it was. The house sat back from the road, at the end of a long gravel driveway. It was a small farmhouse, white with green shutters, surrounded by old oak trees that made the whole property feel tucked away from everything. A wooden porch wrapped around the front. 2 rocking chairs sat side by side near the door. The kind of place that felt quiet on purpose. Frank was already standing on the porch when they pulled up. He was a big man, thick through the shoulders, with silver hair and a short beard that had gone white at the chin. He wore a flannel shirt and work boots, and looked like someone who had spent his whole life doing honest things with his hands. He waved once as Jack climbed off his bike. "Figured you might be bringing company," Frank said. His voice was low and warm, like a fire that had been burning steady for years. "Appreciate this," Jack said. "Don't mention it." Frank looked past him at Emily, who had stepped out of the car with Noah close behind her. His expression softened immediately. "Come on up. Linda's got the guest room ready and there's food on the stove." Emily glanced at Jack. He gave her a small nod. She took Noah's hand and walked toward the porch. Linda appeared at the screen door before they even reached the steps. She was a small woman with kind eyes and gray hair pulled back at her neck. She took one look at Noah, and something in her face just opened up. "Oh, sweetheart," she said softly. She crouched down so she was at his level. "You must be exhausted. Are you hungry?" Noah looked at his mother first. Emily gave his hand a gentle squeeze. He nodded. "Good," Linda said with a warm smile. "Come inside. I made soup." That was all it took. Noah followed Linda through the door like he had known her his whole life. Emily watched him go, and for just a moment the tension in her face let go. Not completely, but enough. She turned to Jack. "Thank you," she said. The words were simple, but she meant them all the way through. Jack just nodded. "Get some rest. We can talk more in the morning." Later, after supper, after Noah had eaten 2 bowls of soup and fallen asleep on the guest bed with Linda's old quilt pulled up to his chin, Emily sat at the kitchen table with Frank and Linda. She did not say much. She did not have to. They talked easily around her, filling the space with gentle conversation, letting her just breathe for once. Jack stayed on the porch. He sat in one of the rocking chairs with Noah's notebook open on his knee and a small flashlight in his hand. Emily had handed it to him quietly before she sat down inside. No instructions, no explanation, just trust. He turned the pages slowly. Noah's handwriting was small and careful. Each entry had a date and a short description. The boy had been thorough, more thorough than most adults would have been. Jack read through the recent weeks first. The black truck, the man outside the school, the figure near Emily's workplace. Then he turned further back. The entries went back further than he expected. He stopped on one near the middle of the notebook. It read, 2 men outside Dad's office again. Dad looked worried when he came home. Jack checked the date beside it. He went very still. That entry was from 6 months before Daniel Carter died. He turned the page. Another entry. A week later. Dad stayed up all night. Mom asked him what was wrong. He said nothing, but his hands were shaking. Jack leaned forward in the rocking chair. He read both entries again, slowly. The men had not shown up after Daniel died. They had been watching long before that. Jack was still on the porch when the kitchen light clicked off inside. The house went quiet. Just the sound of crickets and the soft rustle of oak leaves above him. He stayed in the rocking chair, the flashlight balanced in his palm, the notebook open across his knee. He turned another page, then another. He was near the back of the notebook now. The entries had grown shorter over time, more scattered, like Noah had been too tired or too afraid to write much. Then Jack stopped. Between 2 pages near the very back, something was tucked flat against the spine. He almost missed it entirely. It was folded small, the paper worn thin at the creases like it had been folded and unfolded many times. Someone had placed it there carefully, deliberately. Jack set the flashlight down on the arm of the chair and eased the paper out with 2 fingers. He unfolded it slowly. The handwriting was different from Noah's. Older. A man's hand. The letters were tight and controlled, but there was something urgent in the way the words pressed into the page, like the person writing them had not had much time. Jack read it once. Then he read it again. Then he stood up and walked inside. Emily was still at the kitchen table. Frank and Linda had gone to bed, and she sat alone with a cup of tea she had barely touched. She looked up when Jack came through the screen door. She must have seen something in his face because she straightened in her chair. "What is it?" she asked. Jack sat down across from her. He placed the notebook on the table between them and then set the folded paper down beside it. "This was tucked between the pages," he said quietly. "I need you to read it." Emily looked at the paper for a moment before she picked it up. Her hands were steady, but her eyes were not. She read it. Jack watched her face. The color drained from her cheeks. Her lips pressed together. She set the paper down flat on the table, smoothed it once with her hand, and then looked at Jack. "He wrote this," she said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "That's Daniel's handwriting." "I know," Jack said. She looked back down at the paper. Jack had read it twice already, but the words were still sitting heavy in his chest. Daniel had kept the message short. He wrote that he had found something he was never supposed to find, that the people he had trusted had been taking money from families who had nothing to spare, that he had been collecting proof, but running out of time. And then the last part, the part that hit the hardest. "If something happens to me before I can get this to the right people, the evidence is with Noah. He does not know what he is carrying. Keep him safe. He is the only one I trusted." Emily pressed her fingers against her mouth. "He never told me," she said. "He never said a word." "He was trying to protect you," Jack said. "He was trying to protect both of us." Her voice cracked at the edges. "And instead he left Noah carrying something that put a target on him." Jack let that sit for a moment. He did not rush her. Outside, a light wind moved through the oak trees. The house creaked softly the way old houses do at night. Then something shifted in Jack's mind. A piece locking into place. He looked at the notebook. He looked at the folded letter. And then he thought about Marcus, Dean, and Rick, about how they had been outside Noah's school, not Emily's workplace alone, not just their house, Noah's school. They had not been following Emily. They had been following Noah. Jack sat back in his chair. His jaw tightened. This whole time, Emily had believed she was the one they wanted. She had spent days running and hiding, thinking she was the problem, thinking she was the reason her son was in danger. But it was never about Emily at all. It was the boy. Noah had been the target from the very beginning. Emily kept her eyes on Daniel's letter. She read it a second time, then a third, like she was hoping the words might change if she looked hard enough. They did not change. Jack gave her the time she needed. He sat quietly across the table, both hands wrapped around his coffee mug, watching her piece it together the same way he had on the porch. Finally, she looked up. "The notebook," she said. "Noah's notebook. You think it is connected to what Daniel was doing?" "I do," Jack said. "Not the entries Noah wrote. Those are his. But Daniel used that notebook because he knew it would be safe. Nobody looks twice at a kid's notebook." Emily closed her eyes for just a second. When she opened them again, there was something new in her expression. Not quite anger, not quite grief, something in between. "He hid it with our son," she said slowly. "He put it in Noah's hands and never told either of us." "He was running out of time," Jack said. "He did what he could." "He should have told me." Her voice was quiet but firm. "I was his wife. I could have helped him." Jack did not argue with that. She was right, and she deserved to say it. He reached across the table and turned the notebook to face him. He flipped carefully toward the back, past Noah's last entry, past the place where Daniel's letter had been tucked. He examined the inside of the back cover. He pressed his thumb gently along the spine. Then he felt it. A slight stiffness. A thickness that was not quite right. He tilted the notebook towards the kitchen light and looked more carefully. The back cover had 2 layers. Someone had sealed a thin folded sheet of paper flat against the inside of it, tucked so perfectly that it sat flush with the cardboard. Invisible unless you were looking for it. Jack used his fingernail along the edge. The paper came loose slowly. Emily leaned forward in her chair. Jack unfolded it carefully. It was not a letter this time. It was a document, a printed page covered in rows of numbers, names, and dates. The print was small and dense. Someone had circled 3 entries in pencil and drawn a line connecting them to a handwritten note in the margin. Jack set it flat on the table between them. He and Emily both leaned in. The circled names were not hard to find. Vale Capital Group, Holloway Financial Consulting, Dalton Property Investments, 3 separate names, 3 separate business fronts. But Daniel had drawn that single pencil line connecting all 3 of them to one handwritten note in the margin that said simply, "Same people, same money, different faces." Jack sat back. Marcus Vale, Dean Holloway, Rick Dalton. He had already suspected they were connected to something bigger than a simple grudge against Daniel. But seeing it laid out like this, in Daniel's own handwriting, with dates and figures attached, made it real in a way that suspicion never quite did. The numbers on the document were large. Jack was not a financial expert, but he understood enough to see that the sums flowing through those 3 business names were not small. Families had put money into these accounts. Retirement savings, life savings. The kind of money that took a lifetime to gather and only a moment to lose. Daniel had found all of it. He had tracked it, printed it, circled it, and hidden it where he believed it would survive even if he did not. Jack looked at the names again. Vale, Holloway, Dalton. 3 men who had shown up outside a school. 3 men who had sat in a dark truck watching a 7-year-old boy walk to class. 3 men who had terrorized a widow for days because they were terrified of what a dead man had left behind. Jack placed his hand flat over the document. Daniel knew exactly what they were doing, he said. Emily looked at the page. Her voice came out steady, but her eyes were full. And it cost him everything. The next morning came in quietly. Pale light stretched through the curtains of the Miller's kitchen. The smell of Linda's coffee filled the house. Outside, birds were already going at it, loud and unbothered by everything happening inside these walls. Noah sat at the kitchen table with his notebook open in front of him. But he was not writing. He was just staring at it. His small hands rested flat on either side like he was guarding it from something. Jack came in from the back porch and noticed the boy right away. He poured himself a cup of coffee, slow and quiet. Then he turned and looked at Noah. "You sleep okay?" Noah gave a small shrug. The kind that meant not really, but I do not want to say it. Jack pulled out the chair across from him and sat down. He wrapped both hands around his mug and looked at the notebook. "You filled a lot of those pages yourself," Jack said. Noah glanced down at it. I had to keep track. How long were you keeping track? Since the black truck first came, Noah said. His voice was small. I counted the days. I thought if I wrote it all down, somebody would believe us. Jack nodded slowly. That was smart thinking. Noah looked up at him then. His eyes were careful, searching. Are you scared of anything? Noah asked. Jack thought about that honestly. He did not rush to answer. Yeah, he said. I am. Noah blinked. That was not the answer he expected. What are you scared of? He asked. Letting people down, Jack said simply. People who are counting on me. Noah was quiet for a moment. He looked back at the notebook, then up at Jack again. I was scared I wasn't strong enough to protect Mama, he said. Jack leaned forward just slightly. His voice came out low and steady. Can I tell you something important? Noah nodded. Courage is not about being the strongest person in the room, Jack said. It is not about being big or loud or scary. Courage is deciding to protect someone else even when you are afraid. You did that every single day you filled those pages. That was courage. Noah stared at him. Something shifted in the boy's face. A small, careful thing. Like a door opening just a crack. Later that afternoon, Jack found Noah outside in the miller's backyard. The boy was crouched near the old wooden fence, watching a beetle move slowly through the grass. His brow was furrowed with that deep, serious concentration that only kids can manage. Jack walked over and crouched down beside him. Rhinoceros beetle, Jack said, studying it. Noah looked up fast. Surprised Jack had joined him. You know about beetles? A little, Jack said. I picked up random stuff over the years. Comes from a lot of time on the road with not much else to do. Noah almost smiled. Almost. They crouched there together for a while, watching the beetle navigate the grass like it had somewhere very important to be. Jack, Noah said after a moment. Yeah? Do you think the bad men will come back? Jack looked at him steady. I think some people do not give up easy, but I also think they have not counted on you and me being on the same side. This time Noah did smile. Small, but real. Emily had been standing at the kitchen window. She had watched the whole thing without meaning to. The crouching together in the grass, the quiet conversation, the small smile her son had not managed in days. She pressed her hand gently against the glass. Noah had not smiled like that since before Daniel died. She had almost forgotten the shape of it, the way it reached his eyes before it even finished forming on his mouth. She watched Jack say something she could not hear, and she watched her son nod like those words made perfect sense to him. Her chest tightened. Jack wasn't trying to be anything to Noah. He was just showing up, quietly, steadily, in all the small ways that mattered most, and her son was holding on to it like sunlight. Jack spread everything across Frank's kitchen table. Daniel's hidden note, Noah's notebook. 2 printed pages Jack had gotten from an old contact who knew how to find public financial records. He lined them up side by side and studied them like a map. Frank leaned against the counter, arms crossed, watching him. Talk me through it, Frank said. Jack tapped the corner of the first page. These 3 men, Marcus, Dean, and Rick, they ran an investment group, small time on the outside. Looked like a community fund. Families put money in, trusting them to grow it. Frank frowned. And they never saw it again. Most of them lost everything, Jack said. Savings, retirement money. Some of these families had nothing left after. He picked up the printed page and scanned it again. But somewhere in the middle of all that, something changed. One of the partners started keeping separate records. Frank was quiet. Jack set the page down. Daniel found out what they were doing, and instead of walking away, he started documenting it. Every transaction he could get his hands on. Every family they took money from. He was building a case against his own business partners. That would have made him a target, Frank said quietly. It made him dangerous, Jack said. And they knew it. He reached over and picked up Noah's notebook. He turned it carefully to the back pages where the original folded note had been tucked. He had read it 4 times already, but he read it again now. If anything happens to me, the evidence is with Noah. He is the only person I trust to keep it safe. Jack set it back down. He thought about Daniel, a man he never met, a man who spent his last days quietly carrying the weight of other people's suffering, trying to fix something that was never his fault to begin with, trying to make it right before time ran out. That kind of quiet courage did not make the news. It did not look like anything from the outside. It looked like a tired husband, a worried father, a man carrying too much. Jack understood that better than most. He found Emily on the back porch just before dinner. She was sitting in one of Linda's old wooden chairs, holding a mug with both hands, but not drinking from it. She was just staring out at the yard, where the late afternoon light was turning gold across the grass. Jack sat down in the chair beside her. He did not rush it. He let a moment pass, then another. I found out more about Daniel today, he said. Emily turned her head slowly. Her eyes were calm but careful, the way eyes get when a person is bracing for something they are not sure they want to hear. Tell me, she said. Jack kept his voice steady and even. Daniel was not part of what those men did. He found out about the scam after it was already running. And when he did not look the other way. He started gathering proof. Names, dates, records. He was collecting everything he could find to expose them. Emily went very still. He was building a case, Jack continued, for the families they stole from, regular people who trusted them with everything they had. The mug in Emily's hands trembled slightly. She set it down on the small table beside her. He never told me, she whispered. He was protecting you, Jack said. He did not want the danger near you or Noah. Emily pressed her fingers over her mouth. Her eyes filled. All this time, she said. Her voice broke on the edges of it. I thought he left us with all that debt and all that shame. I thought he was connected to it somehow. I thought... She stopped. She breathed. He was trying to stop it, Jack said quietly. That is what Daniel was doing at the end. He was trying to stop it. Emily closed her eyes, and for a long moment, the only sound was the birds in the yard and the soft, uneven way she was trying to breathe through something that was both the saddest and the most beautiful thing she had ever been told. Jack left early the next morning before the sun had fully come up. He did not tell Emily where he was going. He just left a note on the kitchen table that said he would be back by dark. Linda found it first and nodded like she understood. She set it beside the coffee pot where Emily would see it. Jack had 3 names from the financial records, 3 families who had filed complaints that never went anywhere. The complaints had been buried fast, dismissed without much explanation. But the names were still there in the public records if you knew where to look. He started with the first one. Margaret Owens lived about 40 minutes outside of town, in a small yellow house with a sagging front porch. She was in her late 60s, with silver hair and tired eyes that had probably once been full of light. She answered the door slowly, like she was used to people bringing bad news. Jack took off his sunglasses before he spoke. Mrs. Owens, he said. My name is Jack. I am not here to cause you any trouble. I am here because I think somebody finally has a chance to make what happened to you right." She studied him for a long moment. The leather vest, the tattoos, the size of him standing on her porch. Then she stepped back and opened the door. "I'll put on some coffee," she said. She told him everything. Her late husband had put their retirement savings into the community investment fund. Over $40,000. They had trusted Marcus Vail because he had gone to the same church as them for years. He had shaken their hands. He had smiled at her husband's funeral. When the money disappeared, she filed a complaint. She was told the records showed her husband had agreed to a high-risk structure. She was told there was nothing to be done. She had believed that for 3 years. By the time Jack left, she had given him a folder of documents she had kept in a shoebox under her bed. She had never thrown them away. She said she always hoped someone would come. The second family was younger. Carlos and Rita Mendez had 2 kids in elementary school. Carlos had put in money that was supposed to go toward a down payment on a house. Dean Holloway had been their contact. He had been patient with them, explained everything slowly, made them feel like they were being taken care of. Rita cried when Jack explained why he had come. Not out of sadness, out of something closer to relief. "We thought we were the foolish ones," she said. "We thought we made a mistake and had nobody to blame but ourselves." "You trusted people who were supposed to be trustworthy," Jack said. "That is not a mistake. That is just being human." Carlos handed Jack printed bank records he had saved on a flash drive for 3 years. The third name led Jack to a retired teacher named Howard Briggs. He was 71 years old and lived alone. He had invested money he planned to leave to his grandchildren. He had lost nearly everything. Howard was the quietest of the 3. He sat across from Jack at his kitchen table and folded his hands together. "I always wondered if Daniel Carter knew," Howard said slowly. "We were told he was the one responsible." "He was not," Jack said. "He found out what was happening and tried to stop it. He spent the last part of his life collecting evidence to protect families exactly like yours." Howard looked at his folded hands for a long moment. "Well," he said softly, "then somebody should make sure people know that." Jack got back to Frank's house just as the sky was turning pink. Emily was waiting on the porch steps. She had the note he had left in her hand. He sat down beside her and told her about Margaret, about Carlos and Rita, about Howard. He told her what they had lost and how long they had been waiting. Emily listened to every word. Her jaw tightened. Her eyes went bright and sharp. "He tried to save them," she said. "He did," Jack said. She looked out at the darkening yard. "Then I want the truth out there," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it did not waver. "All of it, every bit of it. Those families deserve that. And so does Daniel." The next morning, Emily was alone on the porch with a cup of coffee when the black truck pulled up. She recognized it before the engine even stopped. Her stomach dropped. 3 doors opened. Marcus stepped out first. He was wearing a pressed shirt, and his hair was neat. He looked like someone's friendly neighbor, but his eyes were cold and flat as he walked toward the porch. Dean came next. His jaw was tight. He moved with the kind of energy that meant he was already angry. Rick stayed near the truck. He kept his hands in his pockets and looked at the ground. Emily stood up slowly. She did not run inside. She did not call out for Frank or Linda. She just stood there with both feet planted on the porch and waited. Marcus stopped at the bottom of the steps. He smiled like it cost him nothing. "Emily," he said, "it is good to see you. We just want to talk." "I do not have anything to say to you," she said. "That is too bad." He tilted his head. "Because we have heard that your new friend has been asking questions, visiting people, stirring things up. He paused. That worries us. I imagine it does, Emily said. Dean stepped forward. His voice was not as smooth as Marcus's. You need to stop this. You hand over whatever Daniel left behind, and we walk away. This whole thing goes quiet. You and your boy get back to your lives. Emily's hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against her thighs so they would stop. Daniel spent the last part of his life trying to do the right thing, she said, and you spent that same time trying to destroy him. Daniel made choices, Marcus said. His voice dropped lower. And those choices hurt your family. You want to keep chasing this? Fine, but you should think about what that means for Noah. A long fight, a hard spotlight, people looking at your family and wondering. He let that sit for a moment. We are giving you a way out, Emily. That is all. She looked at him for a long moment. She felt the fear. It was real. It was running through her chest like cold water, but underneath it, something else was burning. You came to my house, she said. You followed my son. You made a 7-year-old boy so scared that he started keeping a notebook just to prove he was not imagining things. Her voice was steady now. I am not handing over anything. Not today, not ever. Marcus's smile disappeared. You are making a mistake, he said. Then it is mine to make. Dean took one more step towards the porch. You do not understand what we are capable of. I understand exactly what you are capable of, Emily said, and so does everyone else who is going to hear about it very soon. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Marcus straightened up and smoothed the front of his shirt. Think carefully, he said quietly. He turned and walked back to the truck. Dean followed. Rick had not said a single word. The truck pulled away. Emily sat down hard on the porch step. Her coffee cup had gone cold. She held it anyway, just to have something in her hands. Her whole body was trembling now that they were gone. She was still sitting there when she heard the motorcycle. Jack came around the corner of the road and pulled into the driveway. He cut the engine and was off the bike in a few long strides. He saw her face before she said a word. He sat down beside her on the step. They were here, she said. I know. His voice was calm. Frank called me. I came straight back. She told him what they said. All of it. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, Jack was quiet for a moment. Then he looked at her. We are done hiding, he said. We have the families. We have the documents. We have Daniel's evidence. He paused. It is time to finish what he started. Emily looked at him. She nodded once. Okay, she said. Let's finish it. Jack spread everything across Frank's kitchen table. Folders, printed documents, handwritten statements on loose sheets of paper, names, dates, account numbers. It was a lot. It looked like something a detective would put together after months of quiet, careful work. Noah stood in the doorway, watching. He had his notebook tucked under one arm. He was wearing his green striped shirt and his socks did not match, but he did not seem to notice or care. He just watched Jack with wide, serious eyes. Jack looked up and saw him standing there. You can come in, Jack said. You have earned a seat at this table more than most people. Noah walked over slowly and pulled out a chair. He sat down and looked at the papers. There were so many of them. Is that the stuff that proves what they did? Noah asked. A big part of it, Jack said. He sat down across from the boy. Your dad collected most of this before he died. He hid it in pieces so nobody could find it all at once. Smart man. Noah looked down at the table. I miss him. I know you do. Jack's voice was quiet and steady. What he did here took real courage. He could have walked away. could have told himself it was not his problem. But he did not do that. He kept going because he knew innocent people were getting hurt. Noah traced his finger along the edge of one of the folders. "Are you going to hurt those men?" he asked. He looked up. "Marcus and Dean and Rick?" Jack leaned back in his chair. He looked at Noah for a moment before he answered. "No," he said simply. Noah seemed surprised by how fast that answer came. "But they scared us," Noah said. "They followed us. They followed Mom. They made everything bad." "Yeah," Jack said. "They did. And they are going to answer for that." He rested his forearms on the table and looked straight at Noah. "But not because someone hurt them back. That is not how this works." "Then how does it work?" Jack pointed to the pile of papers. "Right there. That is how it works. Every one of those pages is someone telling the truth. Families who lost money, neighbors who got cheated, regular people who trusted the wrong men and paid for it." He paused. "When all of that truth is in the same room at the same time, those 3 men have nowhere left to hide, no story they can tell, no way out." Noah looked at the stack again. It looked different now. It did not just look like paper. It looked like something with weight to it. "So you are not going to fight them," Noah said slowly, working it out as he spoke. "You are going to show everyone what they did." "Exactly right," Jack said. Noah was quiet for a moment. "My dad always said that when something is wrong, you tell the truth about it, even when it is scary." Jack nodded. "Your dad was a wise man." Noah set his notebook down on the table beside the folders. It looked small next to all the other papers, but it belonged there just as much as anything else. "Can mine go in too?" he asked. Jack looked at the worn notebook, the bent cover, the careful handwriting inside from a 7-year-old boy who had been too scared to stop paying attention. "It is already part of the evidence," Jack said. "Has been from the beginning." Noah sat up a little straighter. He looked at the tattoos on Jack's hands. The worn leather vest hanging over the back of the chair. The long scar along Jack's jaw that Noah had noticed on the very first night, but never asked about. For weeks, Noah had wondered what made Jack different from the other scary-looking men who showed up in his life, the ones who made his stomach hurt. Now he thought he understood. It was not that Jack could not fight. It was that Jack chose something harder than fighting. And that, Noah realized quietly, was the strongest thing he had ever seen. The storage unit was small and smelled like old cardboard and motor oil. Jack had found the address tucked inside Daniel's hidden letter, a single line written in careful handwriting at the bottom of the page. No explanation, just a street name, a unit number, and a 4-digit code. Jack had driven out alone in the early morning while the sky was still gray. Frank had wanted to come. Jack told him to stay with Emily and Noah. Some things a person needed to do quietly. The lock clicked open on the first try. Jack pulled the rolling door up slowly. It groaned against the track. Inside, there were 2 plastic storage bins stacked on top of each other, a folding chair, and a small metal box sitting on top of the bins, like it had been placed there on purpose, like someone had wanted it to be found first. Jack crouched down in front of the metal box. It was not locked. Inside, there was a single manila envelope. He opened it. The papers inside were dense. Printed emails, bank transfer records with names and dates highlighted in yellow marker, meeting notes written by hand on lined paper, and at the very back of the envelope, a single typed document that made Jack go still. It was a plan, a real plan, written out in steps. It had all 3 names at the top: Marcus Vale, Dean Holloway, Rick Dalton. It described exactly how they had moved the stolen money through different accounts to hide where it came from. It described how they had created false paper trails. And at the bottom of the last page, in a section labeled Liability Protection, it spelled out exactly how they intended to make Daniel Carter look responsible if anything ever went wrong. They had planned to frame him from the very beginning. Jack sat back on his heels and exhaled slowly. Daniel had not just stumbled across something bad. He had been set up as the person who would take the fall. While he was quietly gathering evidence and trying to do the right thing, these men were already building a false story with his name on it. Jack stayed crouched there for a long moment. He thought about Emily. How she had spent years carrying guilt and confusion about a husband she never fully understood. How she had rebuilt her life on shaky ground because she did not know if the ground was even hers to stand on. He thought about Noah. 7 years old, keeping a notebook, watching the door, protecting his mother from something he could not name. And he thought about Daniel, a man who had tried to do the right thing and had been buried for it. Jack carefully placed everything back in the envelope. He folded the top down and held it in both hands for a moment. Then he stood up, tucked the envelope under his arm, and walked back to his motorcycle. He drove straight to Frank's house. Emily was in the kitchen when he came through the door. She was holding a mug of coffee with both hands, and she looked like she had not slept much. She looked up when she heard his boots on the floor. Jack set the envelope on the kitchen table without saying anything. He opened it and laid the last document flat in front of her. He pointed to the section at the bottom of the page. She read it. Jack watched her face. She read it twice, maybe 3 times. Her hands tightened around the mug. Her eyes moved slowly across the words and then stopped at Daniel's name. When she finally looked up, her eyes were wet. "They planned it," she said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "They planned to blame him the whole time." "Yes," Jack said. She pressed her lips together hard. She looked back down at the page. "He never had a chance," she said. "He had more of a chance than they expected," Jack said. "He found all of this. He hid it. He made sure it could not disappear." Jack looked at her steadily. "He made sure you could find out the truth someday." Emily set her mug down. She pressed both hands flat against the table and stared at the document for a long moment. Something was shifting in her face. The tight, careful look she always carried was loosening. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we put it all together," Jack said. "Everything your husband collected, everything Noah recorded, these documents, the statements from the families who got hurt." He paused. "We bring it all into the same room at the same time, and those 3 men are going to have to stand there and watch the truth come out." Emily looked at him. For the first time since the night she had run into that diner, the fear in her eyes was not the first thing Jack saw. Hope was. "Do you really think it will work?" she asked quietly. "I know it will," Jack said. "Your husband made sure of that." Emily looked down at the papers one more time. Then she straightened up. She squared her shoulders the way Noah sometimes did when he was trying to be brave. "Then let's finish it," she said. Jack made the calls himself. He used the phone numbers his club members had gathered over the past week. Families who had lost savings. Couples who had trusted their money to what looked like a solid investment. Older people who had handed over retirement funds and watched them vanish. One by one, Jack reached them. One by one, they said yes. The meeting was set for Thursday evening at a community hall on the edge of town. A plain brick building with folding chairs and fluorescent lights, and a parking lot big enough for a crowd. Frank helped arrange the room. Jack's club members spread the word quietly and made sure the right people were there, not just the victims. 2 investigators who had been quietly looking into the scam for months. A local journalist who had heard rumors but never had proof, and a lawyer who had agreed to review the documents the night before and had gone very quiet while reading them. "These are serious," the lawyer had said. "Yes," Jack had told him. "They are." By 7 o'clock, the room was full. Jack stood near the back wall with his arms crossed. He watched the chairs fill up. Older couples, young families. A woman who came alone and sat in the front row with a folder pressed to her chest. A man who walked in slowly with a cane and found a seat near the aisle. Emily sat near the front with Frank and Linda on either side of her. Noah was not there. Linda had made sure of that. The boy was safe at home with one of Frank's neighbors. This was not a room for a child. The documents were laid out on a long table at the front of the room, organized, clear. Every piece of evidence Daniel had gathered was there, along with Noah's notebook, open to the first page of careful handwritten dates. Jack had placed the notebook there on purpose. He wanted people to see it. At 7:15, the door opened. Marcus Vale walked in first. He was dressed neatly, his shirt pressed, his expression calm and controlled. Dean Holloway followed behind him, jaw tight, eyes already moving around the room. Rick Dalton came last, slower than the other 2, his face pale before he had even taken a full step inside. Marcus stopped walking when he saw the crowd. His eyes swept the room. The families. The investigators sitting at a table to the side with folders open in front of them. The journalist with a notepad. The lawyer standing near the document table. His calm expression flickered. Dean stepped up beside him and said something under his breath. Marcus did not answer. Jack pushed off the wall and walked toward them. He stopped a few feet away. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "Glad you came," Jack said simply. Marcus looked at him. Then he looked past him at the table covered in documents. "What is this?" Marcus asked. His voice was still controlled, still trying. "This," Jack said, "is everything Daniel Carter collected before you could stop him." The lawyer stepped forward then. He introduced himself and explained to the room what the documents contained. He was clear and direct. He named the scheme. He explained the false paper trails. He described exactly how the money had moved and where it had gone. And then he read the section about Daniel, the plan to blame him. The room went very quiet. The woman in the front row pressed her hand over her mouth. The man with the cane bowed his head slowly. Emily sat perfectly still. Her hands were folded in her lap. Her chin was up. Marcus started to speak. He got 3 words out before one of the investigators stood up, held up a badge, and told him very clearly that it was time to stop talking. Dean looked at Rick. Rick was already staring at the floor. One by one, the people in that room stood up. Quietly, without anger, they just stood, together, facing the 3 men who had taken so much from them. Daniel Carter's name was written at the top of every page of evidence, not as the guilty man, as the one who had tried to stop it. The story spread fast. By Friday morning, people were talking about what had happened in that community hall. By Saturday, the local newspaper had run a piece. The journalist who had been sitting quietly with his notepad had written everything down. And now it was in print for the whole town to read. Daniel Carter's name was cleared. The 3 men were facing serious questions from investigators. The victims had come forward with their stories. The lawyer was already working on next steps. And in the middle of it all was a name most people had not expected. Jack Turner. The article mentioned him. It described how he had gathered the evidence, made the calls, and brought the families together. The journalist had been careful with his words, but he had told the truth. Jack was the one who had made Thursday night happen. For a day or two, people responded with something close to warmth. A woman whose retirement savings had been stolen stopped Jack outside the diner and grabbed both his hands. She did not say anything for a moment. She just held on. "Thank you," she finally said. Her voice cracked on both words. Jack nodded. He told her he was glad it was over. A family he had never met left an envelope at the diner counter with his name on it. Inside was a handwritten note that said simply, "You gave us back our dignity." Jack folded that note and put it in his jacket pocket. But then the other voices started. It began online. A comment under the newspaper article that someone had shared. Then another. Then more. Why is a Hell's Angel involved in any of this? How do we know he wasn't part of it from the beginning? Look up his record. He's been arrested before. Why should we trust him? Someone dug up a photograph of Jack from years ago. Younger, harder looking, standing with his club outside a bar, every one of them in their leather vests. The photo circulated without any context, without any explanation of who Jack was now or what he had actually done. A local woman wrote a letter to the newspaper. She said she appreciated that the victims had been helped, but she questioned why someone with Jack's background had been given access to sensitive documents and frightened families. She used the word concerning twice. The journalist who had written the original article reached out to Jack directly. He wanted a follow-up piece. He wanted Jack's side of the story. Jack told him no. He sat with Frank that evening on the back porch. The sky was turning orange and purple over the tree line. Frank's old dog was stretched out on the boards near the steps, barely moving. Frank handed Jack a cup of coffee without a word. Jack held it with both hands and looked out at the yard. "People are always going to see the vest first," Jack said quietly. Frank did not rush to argue. He just listened. "I knew that going in," Jack continued. "I've known it my whole life." He paused. "Doesn't mean it stopped stinging?" Frank looked over at him. "You know what you did." "Yeah," Jack said. "I do." But knowing what he had done, and feeling like the town believed it, were two very different things. And Jack had spent enough years being looked at sideways to know when a place was starting to close its doors to him. Not everyone. Not even most people. But enough. He thought about it that night while sitting alone in the small room Frank and Linda had given him. The room was quiet. Outside, the road was dark and still. He thought about Emily and Noah, about whether they were truly safe now, about whether the investigators had what they needed, about whether the lawyer could carry things forward without him. He turned it all over slowly in his mind, and by the time the room had gone fully dark around him, a quiet decision had begun to settle in his chest. He would make sure they were safe, and then he would ride. Jack was up before sunrise. He moved quietly through the house, careful not to wake anyone. The floorboards in the hallway had a soft creak near the bathroom door, so he stepped wide around that spot. He had learned where all the quiet places were over the past few days. He set his coffee cup in the sink. He straightened the blanket on the bed. He left the small room exactly the way he had found it. Outside, the morning air was cool and damp. The sky was a pale gray, the kind that comes just before the sun decides to show up. Birds were already going somewhere. Jack could hear them in the trees at the edge of Frank's yard. He walked to the side of the house where his motorcycle was parked under the old wooden overhang. He pulled back the cover slowly and folded it into a neat square. Then he stood there for a moment with his hands on the handlebars, just breathing. The bike looked the same as always, worn and solid and familiar, It had taken him everywhere and asked for nothing. He checked the tire pressure. He wiped a smudge off the side mirror with the sleeve of his jacket. Small things. Quiet things. The kind of tasks a man does when his mind is already made up and his hands just need something to hold on to. Emily found him there about 10 minutes later. She came around the corner of the house in her jacket, her arms crossed against the morning chill. She stopped when she saw him crouching beside the rear wheel. "You were just going to leave," she said. It was not a question. Jack stood up slowly. "Emily," without saying goodbye. She looked at him steadily. Her voice was calm, but her eyes were not. "You're safe now," Jack said. "The lawyer has what he needs. The investigators are moving. Noah's okay." He looked at her directly. "That was the point." "That was your point," she said. "Not mine." Jack did not answer right away. He looked down at the handlebars. "People are already talking about me," he said. "You saw what they wrote. You know what they're saying." He said it plainly, without any bitterness in his voice, just the truth, the way he had always carried it. "The longer I stay, the more that noise follows you and Noah. You don't need that." Emily shook her head. "You don't get to decide that for us." "I'm trying to protect you." "You already did," she said. "That's not what this is about, and you know it." Jack was quiet. "You're leaving because it hurts," Emily said gently. "Because you did something good and people questioned it anyway, and that's an awful feeling, Jack. I'm not saying it isn't." She stepped a little closer. "But running from it won't make it stop." Jack looked out toward the tree line. The sky was getting lighter. Thin gold lines were pushing up along the horizon. "People are always going to see the vest first," he said quietly. "I've accepted that." "Maybe," Emily said, "but Noah doesn't see the vest." Jack did not say anything to that. They stood there for a moment in the still morning air. A bird called out from somewhere across the yard. Then another answered it from far away. The back door of the house opened. Noah stepped outside in his sneakers, still half asleep, his hair pushed flat on one side. He was holding something in both hands. He walked across the damp grass slowly, looking down at his feet, then looking up at Jack. He held out the notebook. The small, worn, battered notebook that had started all of this. The one with the dates and the names and the careful handwriting of a 7-year-old boy who had been too afraid to trust anyone. Jack looked at it. He did not take it right away. "I want you to have it," Noah said. Jack crouched down to the boy's level. He looked at the notebook, then at Noah's face. Then he took it gently with both hands. He opened it to the last page. In careful, uneven letters, Noah had written 4 words. "Jack saved us." Jack was still crouching down beside Noah, the notebook open in his hands, when Emily let out a small, quiet sound. Not a gasp, not a cry, something softer than both. Jack looked up. Emily was standing at the side of the house with her arms still crossed, but she was no longer looking at him. She was looking down at something in her jacket pocket. Her fingers had found it while she stood there in the cold morning air. Something she had not known was there. A folded piece of paper. She pulled it out slowly, the way you pull something out when you are not sure what it is. The paper was thin and worn at the edges, like it had been folded and refolded many times. It had been tucked into the inner pocket of the jacket. The jacket she had grabbed from the back of the closet 3 days before she and Noah ran. She stared at it. "Emily?" Jack said. She did not answer right away. She just looked at the paper in her hands. Then she looked up at Jack with wide eyes. "It's his handwriting," she said. Jack stood up slowly. Noah moved close to his mother's side without being told. He reached up and took her hand. They stood there together in the pale morning light. the three of them, while Emily carefully unfolded the letter. Her hands were shaking a little. Not from the cold. She cleared her throat and began to read aloud. Her voice was steady at first, then softened as the words settled into her. If you found this, then something went wrong. I am sorry for that. I am sorry I could not fix it myself. She paused. She pressed her lips together for a moment, and then kept going. I do not know who you are. I do not know your name or what you look like. But if you are reading this, it means you chose to help my family when you did not have to. It means you stood between them and the people I was afraid of. Noah leaned into Emily's arm. She held him close with one hand and kept the letter steady with the other. I thought a long time about what kind of person would do that. I think it is someone who knows what it feels like to be looked at wrong. Someone who has been judged before they ever said a word. Someone who understands that the world doesn't always see people the way they are. Jack was very still. Emily kept reading. I want you to know something. The strongest person is not the one who fights the hardest. It is the one who chooses kindness when anger would be easier. Anyone can swing a fist. It takes real strength to stand in front of someone who is afraid and say, I am not going anywhere. The birds were quiet now. The yard was still. Even the morning seemed to slow down around them. You did not have to do this, but you did. And because of that, my son will grow up knowing that good people exist. My wife will know she is not alone. That matters more than anything I could have left behind. Emily's voice broke on the last sentence. She stopped reading. She folded the letter gently against her chest and stood there with her eyes closed. Noah reached up and wrapped both arms around her waist without saying a word. Jack did not move for a long moment. He looked at the notebook still in his hands. He looked at the 4 words Noah had written on the last page. Then he looked at Emily, holding that letter close. A message from a man who had believed that someone like Jack existed before he ever walked through that diner door. Something shifted inside him. Not loudly. Not in a way anyone else could see. But it was real. He had spent years believing his life added up to nothing but road miles and a vest that made people nervous. He had carried that belief the way some men carry old injuries. Quietly, without ever really putting it down. Daniel Carter had never met him. But Daniel had known him anyway, and somehow that made all the difference. 3 weeks later, the kitchen table at Linda and Frank's house was covered in papers. Not the kind of papers Jack had been sorting through before. No documents, no evidence, no proof of anything dark or dangerous. These papers were different. There were notes in Emily's handwriting, lists of names, phone numbers, questions she had written down and then circled twice because she wanted to remember them. There was a hand-drawn sketch of a floor plan for a small building. There was a printed page about how to start a non-profit organization, with yellow highlighter marks running through half of it. Linda set a fresh cup of coffee near Emily's elbow without being asked. Emily barely looked up. She was leaning over the table with a pen in her hand, her hair tucked behind one ear, writing something down with the kind of focus Jack had only seen from her once before. The night she stayed up reading every page of Daniel's evidence, determined to understand all of it. You've got that same look, Jack said from across the table. Emily glanced up. What look? The one that says you're not stopping until it's done? She almost smiled. Good, because I'm not. Jack leaned back in his chair and looked at the papers spread across the table. He had been helping her organize her thoughts for the past hour. It was not the kind of work he usually did. He was better at finding things, at asking the right questions in the right places, at making phone calls to people who owed him a favor. But Emily did not need that from him right now. She needed someone to sit across the table and say, "Yes, keep going." So that is what he did. The idea had come to her quietly, the morning after they read Daniel's letter. She had not announced it, or made a big deal about it. She had simply walked into the kitchen, picked up a pen, and started writing. When Linda asked what she was doing, Emily said, "I want to help the other families, the ones Marcus and the others stole from. I want to give them somewhere to go." Linda had put down her dish towel and sat right beside her. Jack had pulled up a chair not long after. The plan was still small. Just an outline, really. A community support center for families who had been hurt by scams and financial betrayal. A place where people could get help understanding what happened to them, find legal resources, talk to others who had been through the same thing. Emily wanted it to feel like a kitchen table, she said. Not a waiting room. Not an office. A place where people felt like someone was actually listening. "What are you going to call it?" Jack asked. Emily set her pen down. She looked at the sketch of the floor plan for a moment. "Daniel's Hope," she said. "I want people to know it was built because of him. Not in spite of what happened, because of who he was." Jack nodded slowly. He looked down at the table. "He would have liked that," he said. "I think so too." They sat quietly for a moment. Outside, the afternoon light was stretching long and golden through the window. Somewhere down the hall, they could hear Noah moving around in the room Linda had set up for him. Then the house went still again. A few minutes later, Noah appeared in the kitchen doorway. He was holding the notebook, the worn one with the dark blue cover, the same notebook that had started all of this. He looked at the papers on the table. He looked at his mother working. He looked at Jack sitting beside her. Then he walked over to the corner of the room, pulled a chair up near the window and sat down. He opened the notebook to a fresh page near the back. He uncapped a pen. He started to write. Jack watched him from the corner of his eye. Noah was not writing fast or urgent, the way he used to when he was recording license plates and times and places. He was writing slowly, carefully, like each word mattered, and he wanted to get it exactly right. The weeks moved slowly and gently, like water finding its way downstream. Noah started school again. A new one, closer to Frank and Linda's house, with a wide front lawn and a teacher named Mrs. Okafor, who had kind eyes and a loud, warm laugh that filled the whole classroom. The first morning, Noah stood at the door of the building and held very still. Emily stood beside him, her hand resting on his shoulder. "You okay?" she asked. Noah thought about it for a second. Then he nodded. He walked in. Emily watched until the door closed behind him. Then she let out a long, slow breath that felt like it had been sitting in her chest for months. Jack was waiting by his motorcycle at the curb. He did not say anything. He just looked at her face and understood. "He did it," she said. "Yeah," Jack said. "He did." Those became the kinds of mornings they shared. Small ones, quiet ones, the kind where nothing dramatic happened, and yet everything felt important. Jack came by most days, not always with a reason. Sometimes he showed up with a toolbox because the back porch step had been creaking for 2 weeks, and nobody had fixed it. He got down on one knee, pulled out a hammer and a couple of nails, and had it done in 10 minutes while Linda watched from the doorway with her arms folded and a small smile on her face. Sometimes he came by in the afternoon, and Noah would already be home from school, sitting at the kitchen table with homework spread out in front of him. Noah had started leaving a chair pulled out slightly from the table. Not his own chair. The one across from him. Jack's chair. Neither of them ever said anything about it. Jack would just sit down, pour himself a coffee from the pot on the counter, and look over at whatever Noah was working on. "This one's about fractions," Noah said one afternoon, pushing his worksheet across the table. Jack looked at it. He picked up the pencil sitting nearby. "Okay," he said, "let's figure it out." He was not the kind of teacher who made it feel like a lesson. He talked through things the way he talked through everything, straight and simple, no big words, no rush, just steady, even patience that made Noah feel like getting it wrong was not something to be afraid of. One afternoon, they were out in Frank's yard when Jack noticed Noah watching him check the tire pressure on his motorcycle. "Want to learn how it works?" Jack asked. Noah looked at the motorcycle, then at Jack. "Yeah." Jack spent the next hour showing him, not just the tire, the whole bike, the chain, the brakes, the way the engine worked in simple terms a 7-year-old could follow. Noah asked questions, a lot of them. Jack answered every single one, without rushing or sighing or glancing at his watch. Emily watched from the porch step. She had a mug of tea in her hands, and the late afternoon sun was turning everything golden. She watched Noah crouch down beside the front tire, pointing at something and asking Jack another question. She watched Jack crouch down right beside him, so they were at the same level. She thought about Daniel. She thought about how much he would have loved this. How he always used to say that the best thing a man could do for his child was make them feel like their questions mattered. Jack made Noah feel exactly that. She was still thinking about it later that evening. Noah had gone to bed early, worn out from the good kind of tired that came from a full day. The house was quiet. Jack was still at the kitchen table, finishing the last of his coffee before heading out. Emily sat down across from him. She wrapped both hands around her own mug and looked at him for a moment. "You know," she said quietly, "when we lost Daniel, I thought that was it. I thought our family was just going to be the two of us from then on." She paused. "I didn't think we'd ever find someone like you." Jack looked up at her. "You've become the family we never expected to find," she said. "The change did not happen all at once. It came in small pieces, quiet moments that stacked up over days and weeks until they added up to something real. It started with the Hendersons. They lived 2 streets over from Frank and Linda. Their car had been sitting in the driveway for a week, with the hood propped open, and a look of defeat about it. Jack noticed it one morning when he was passing by on his motorcycle. He stopped. He walked over. The husband, a man named Roy, came out the front door looking wary. Roy had seen Jack around the neighborhood. He had seen the vest, the tattoos, the wide, heavy-set frame that made people move aside on sidewalks without thinking about it. "Need a hand?" Jack asked. Roy hesitated for just a second. Then he said, "Yeah, actually, yeah, I do." Jack spent 2 hours under that hood. Roy handed him tools and watched, and did not say much at first. But somewhere in the middle of it, when Jack explained what the problem was in plain, simple words that made Roy feel like he understood his own car for the first time, Roy relaxed. When the engine turned over, Roy let out a short laugh of pure relief. "What do I owe you?" he asked. "Nothing," Jack said. He wiped his hands on a rag and handed back the wrench. Roy told his neighbor. His neighbor told someone else. That was how it worked, not through announcements or anything official, just through the ordinary, steady way that a community passes along what it knows about a person. A woman named Carol stopped Jack near the diner one morning. She was holding 2 bags of groceries and looked embarrassed about what she was going to say before she even said it. "I heard you helped the Hendersons," she started. I've been having trouble with my back porch door. The frame's swollen and it won't close right. I know it's a small thing and I know you probably don't have time, but my daughter heard about you and said I should just ask." She said all of it very fast, like she was trying to get it out before she changed her mind. Jack looked at her. "When do you want me to come by?" Carol blinked. "That's it? You just—" "Yes?" "That's it," he said. She laughed. It was a nervous laugh at first, and then a real one. He fixed her door the next morning. After that, it kept coming. A broken fence post, a leaking pipe under a kitchen sink, a family whose van had broken down on the main road at 7 in the morning, and who stood on the shoulder looking scared and cold until Jack pulled over and stayed with them until it was sorted. He never asked for anything. He never made a big deal out of it. He just showed up, did what needed doing, and went on his way. The people of that community began to learn something about Jack Turner. What he looked like on the outside had nothing to do with who he was. But it was the afternoon at the community hall when things shifted in a way that went deeper than fixing doors or car engines. Someone had organized a gathering, a quiet one. Families who had been victims of Marcus Vail and Dean Holloway's scam, people who had lost savings, people who had spent years thinking they were the only ones it happened to. They had come together to say something out loud that they had never been able to say before. When Jack walked in, the room went still for just a moment. Then a man near the front stood up. He was older, maybe 60, with a tired face and careful eyes. He looked directly at Jack. "You didn't have to help any of us," the man said. His voice was steady but thick with feeling. "You had no reason to, and you did it anyway." The room was quiet. Then the man started to clap, and one by one every person in that room joined him. Jack stood very still. He looked around at the faces, all of them looking back at him. Not at his vest, not at his tattoos, at him. Noah had not wanted to go back at first. He stood by the front door on the morning of his first day back at school, his backpack on his shoulders and his shoes already tied, but his feet not moving. Emily stood beside him with her hand resting gently on his back. "You don't have to say anything to anyone," she said quietly. "You can just go and be there. That's enough." Noah looked down at his shoes. "What if they ask me where I've been?" "Then you tell them as much or as little as you want," Emily said. "It's your story." He thought about that for a moment. Then he nodded and walked out the door. The classroom smelled like pencil shavings and the dry warmth of the heater running too long. His teacher, Mrs. Grover, gave him a small smile when he came in and pointed to his old seat like nothing had changed. Some things had, though. The kids around him were curious but not unkind. A boy named Drew leaned over during morning work time and whispered, "You were gone forever. Where were you?" Noah looked at him. He thought about the diner, the rain, the dark parking lot and the blur of headlights that had made his stomach drop every time a car slowed down. He thought about Frank and Linda's house, and the smell of Linda's cooking, and the way the guest bedroom had felt so safe it almost made him cry the first night he slept there. He thought about Jack. "Something happened to me and my mom," Noah said, "but someone helped us." Drew stared at him. "Who?" Noah opened his mouth. Then he smiled just a little. "I'll tell you at lunch," he said. At lunch, he did. He sat at the round table near the window with Drew and 2 other kids named Mia and Carson. He did not tell them everything. He was not ready for everything. But he told them the part that felt most important. He told them about being scared for a long time, about feeling like he had to watch out for his mom because nobody else was, about writing things down because he was afraid nobody would believe him. "Did they?" Mia asked. "Believe you?" "One person did," Noah said. He told them about Jack. He described him the way he remembered first seeing him in the diner. The wide shoulders, the leather vest, the tattoos on his hands, the face that looked like it had been through a lot of hard things. "He sounds scary," Carson said honestly. "He did at first," Noah agreed. "But he wasn't. He was the safest person in the whole room. I just didn't know it yet." He paused, turning his juice box slowly in his hands. "People aren't always what they look like," he said. "I learned that." The table was quiet for a second, in that way that meant the words had actually landed somewhere. Later that afternoon, Mrs. Grover asked the class if anyone wanted to share something they had learned outside of school. Noah's hand went up before he even decided to raise it. He stood up in front of the room. His heart beat a little fast, but his voice was steady. "I learned that being brave doesn't mean not being scared," he said. "It means letting the right people help you even when you're scared." Mrs. Grover looked at him with soft eyes. "That's a very wise thing to know, Noah." He sat back down. That afternoon, Jack picked him up from school. It was a simple thing Emily had arranged, just for that first day back, just so Noah would see a familiar face waiting for him. Noah came through the front doors and spotted Jack leaning against the motorcycle in the school parking lot. A few other kids walking out stopped and stared. Jack stood with his arms crossed, squinting a little in the afternoon sun. Noah walked straight up to him. "How was it?" Jack asked. "Good," Noah said. Then he reached into his backpack and pulled out his notebook. He held it out so Jack could see the page he had opened it to. It was not a list of dates and times and license plates. It was names. People's names. Frank, Linda, Mrs. Grover, Drew, Mia, Carson. And at the very top, in careful letters that a 7-year-old had pressed deep into the page, was the name Jack. "I don't write in it because I'm scared anymore," Noah said. He looked up at Jack with clear, steady eyes. "I write in it because I want to remember the good people who changed my life." The morning was cool and clean, the kind that made everything feel new. Jack stood beside his motorcycle in the parking lot of Frank and Linda's house. The sun was still low, throwing long gold strips of light across the pavement. His leather vest was on. His gloves were tucked into his jacket pocket. The bike sat ready, its engine quiet, waiting. He had packed light. He always packed light, a bedroll, a change of clothes, a little cash folded into his front pocket. That was all he had ever needed. But something felt different this time. He checked the tire pressure the way he always did before a long ride. He checked the mirrors. He adjusted the strap on his saddlebag. He went through every small, familiar step. And the whole time, something warm sat in his chest that had not been there before. Something steady. He heard the screen door open behind him. Frank came down the porch steps with 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to Jack without a word, and they stood there together in the quiet morning the way old friends do, not needing to fill the air with anything. "When you coming back?" Frank finally asked. "Week or 2, Jack said. "Maybe less." Frank nodded like that was the right answer. "Linda's already planning what she's going to cook." Jack almost smiled. "Tell her not to go to any trouble." "You know she's going to," Frank said. Jack did know. He wrapped both hands around the coffee cup and looked out at the road beyond the lot. The old version of him would have already been on that road. No goodbyes, no plans to return, just the engine and the miles and the long, quiet feeling of going nowhere in particular. He stayed right where he was. Emily's car pulled into the lot a little before 9. Noah was out the door before she even finished parking. He ran across the pavement in his sneakers, backpack bouncing, and stopped right in front of Jack with a big, wide-open grin. "You said you were leaving at 9, Noah said. "It's not 9 yet." "That's right," Jack said. So we made it, Noah said proudly. Emily walked up behind him, shaking her head with a smile. He made me leave the house 20 minutes early, she said. He counted on the clock. Smart kid, Jack said. Emily looked at him with those quiet, steady eyes she had now. Eyes that had been frightened when he first met her. Eyes that had seen too much in too short a time. But they were clear now. Calm the way a lake goes calm after a storm passes through. You ready? She asked. Just about, Jack said. Linda had come down from the porch and was standing beside Frank, the four of them together, and Jack in the middle of it all. He was not used to that, being in the middle of something that felt like belonging. He had spent so many years on the outside of things, on the edge of rooms, on the back roads between places where other people's lives happened. Noah tugged his sleeve. We're going to the diner, Noah said. The one where we found you. Mom said we should all have breakfast there, before you go. Jack looked at Emily. It felt right, she said simply. That's where it started. It should be where we send you off. They drove over in 2 cars, while Jack followed on the motorcycle. The diner looked the same as it always had. Same sign with the flicker in the second letter. Same bell above the door that rang when you walked in. Same smell of coffee and warm bread that hit you right away. They took the big booth near the window, all 5 of them. Frank on one side, Linda beside him, Emily and Noah across from them. Noah kneeling on the seat so he could see out the glass at Jack's motorcycle parked right outside. Jack sat at the end, right in the middle of all of it. Linda reached over and put her hand on his arm. You know you always have a place to come back to now, she said. We want you to know that. Frank nodded once, firm and quiet, the way Frank always said the things that mattered most. Emily looked at him from across the table. She did not say anything right away. She just smiled. The kind of smile that says more than words can. And Noah, still kneeling on the seat and looking out at the motorcycle, turned back around and looked straight at Jack. You're not just passing through anymore, Noah said. You belong here, with us. Months passed the way good things tend to, quietly, steadily, one small moment at a time. The leaves had turned by the time Jack came back through town. Orange and red and yellow pressed against the edges of the road as he rode. The sky above was the deep, clean blue that only comes in autumn. The air was cold enough to feel on his face, and warm enough to still be comfortable. He pulled into the diner parking lot just before noon. Same cracked pavement, same faded painted lines, same flickering letter on the sign above the door. Some things do not change, and Jack had stopped thinking that was a bad thing. There was something good about places that stayed themselves. He parked the bike and pulled off his helmet. Sat still for a moment, just listening. The bell above the door rang when he walked in. The smell of coffee and warm bread wrapped around him like a familiar hand on his shoulder. The lunch crowd was light. A few truckers at the counter, an older couple near the back sharing a slice of pie. 2 kids in a corner booth, fighting over a menu while their dad tried to keep the peace. The waitress behind the counter looked up. Her name was Carol. She had worked the evening shift the night Emily and Noah came through the door, soaking wet and terrified. She had watched the whole thing from behind the coffee station. The little boy running to the big, scary biker. The man in the leather vest kneeling down so he could look the child in the eye. She had thought about that night many times since. Carol set down the coffee pot and smiled at Jack. A real smile. The kind that carries a whole story in it. Booth or counter? She asked. Booth, Jack said. She poured his coffee before he even sat down fully. Slid the mug across the table and then leaned one hand on the edge, looking at him like she was trying to find the right words. "I heard what happened," she said. "With the family. With those men." Jack wrapped his hands around the mug. "Small town," he said. "Small town," Carol agreed. "But big news." She shook her head slowly. "That little boy, he came in here last week with his mama. You should have seen him. Running around, full of energy, showing his mom the exact spot where he found you." She laughed softly. "He told me you smelled like motor oil and coffee." Jack looked down at his mug. The corner of his mouth moved just slightly. "He's not wrong," Jack said. Carol laughed again. Then her face went soft. "He looked good, Jack. Really good. Both of them did. Emily had this light in her eyes, something she didn't have that night." She paused. "You did that?" Jack did not answer right away. He turned his mug in his hands, slow and steady. "They did that," he said quietly. "I just stayed long enough to let them." Carol looked at him for a moment longer. Then she nodded and went back to the counter. Jack drank his coffee and watched the light come through the window. It fell in long, pale strips across the table. Outside, 2 cars pulled into the lot. A door opened. He heard a familiar voice. He heard Noah. The boy came through the door first, the bell ringing sharp and clear above his head. Emily followed right behind him. And just behind her, a neighbor from their street, a woman Jack had met only once, came in holding the hand of a small girl who looked at everything in the diner with wide, curious eyes. Noah spotted Jack immediately. His whole face lit up. He ran to the booth, slid right in across from Jack like he had done it 100 times. The little girl with the neighbor pointed across the diner, her small voice rising with a question. Noah turned and looked at Jack. Then he turned back to the girl with the brightest, most certain expression. "That's Jack," Noah said. "He looks like a storm, but he's the person who brings sunshine." Jack went very still. The noise of the diner continued around him, forks and voices and the hiss of the coffee machine. But inside, everything was quiet. He had spent years believing the world would only ever see the leather vest and the worn boots and the road-roughened hands. He had spent years telling himself that was enough, that moving through life alone and quiet was enough. But this was something else entirely. This was a child who had once been too afraid to sleep. A child who had carried a notebook full of fear because he thought no one would believe him. That same child had just told a stranger who Jack was. Not as a warning. As a gift. Jack looked at Noah. The boy was already chattering happily, pulling Emily into the booth beside him, asking Carol what the soup was today, full of the wonderful, unstoppable energy of a kid who finally felt safe in the world. Jack pressed his hand flat against the table, felt the solid wood beneath his palm. For years he had asked himself what kind of mark he was leaving, whether his life meant anything past the miles on his odometer and the people who stepped aside when he walked into a room. Now he knew. His greatest legacy was not the roads he had ridden or the trouble he had managed to stay out of in his later years. It was not the vest or the reputation or any of that. It was this. A small boy who looked at him and saw sunshine. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.